What happens in that situation? Well, we would have to be able to come up with a Chapter 13 plan to pay that debt back. And $100,000, that's a lot of money. That's a really high payment. I mean, you're probably talking close to $2,000 a month in a Chapter 13. After all is said and done and we factor everything in, what do you do in a situation where somebody can't afford it? Well, of course, normally when somebody can't afford to pay debt, they file Chapter 7. But if you have a house and you file Chapter 7 with excess equity, a trustee is going to sell that house. And one important thing that I try to always stress to anybody who files a Chapter 7 and owns a home, once you're in, you are in. You cannot quit. You cannot get out.
Welcome to the Bankruptcy Podcast, a podcast about untangling the complex world of bankruptcy in Georgia. Each week, we deliver the best insights and practical advice on how to navigate the legal waters of bankruptcy with expert guidance and real-life stories. Now here's your host, Jeff Kelly.
Hello, this is Jeff Kelly, and in today's podcast, I want to talk about equity in people's houses. How does that sabotage potential Chapter 13 cases? So ever since COVID, the price of housing in Georgia has just been going through the roof, particularly in Metro Atlanta, particularly in Cherokee County, Georgia. Just up and away. And, I've been practicing since 1998, and I can remember for many, many years, people had hardly any equity in their homes. And I can remember, around 2008, when everything crashed, it was people had negative equity. They owed more than the house was actually worth. And this went on for a long, long time. And as a consequence of a decade of a really unprofitable housing market, a lot of people left the industry. And when I say left, I mean they found completely brand new jobs, brand new life, brand new career, and they haven't come back, and they're not going to come back for a long time, probably. So for a while now, at least the last 5 years, there's a shortage of people building houses. There's a shortage of people who know how to build houses correctly and in the right way. And so they're not going up. And then if you combine that with, we've got really high interest rates, understandably, a lot of builders who are familiar with history, they're just not inclined to go build a 500 house neighborhood because they've got high interest rates on their loans. And what if the market fell like it has done before? They're just not willing to take the risk. And so as a consequence, I am seeing rents go higher. I'm seeing equity go high. And this can be extremely problematic for consumers who are carrying a lot of credit card debt. And I keep hoping these values are going to come down. They're not. And, if you don't have debt, then rising equity is great. Your wealth is increasing. But if you've got a tremendous amount of equity, what happens? So let me work you through a hypothetical. And if anybody has spoken to me recently, you think I'm talking about your case, I'm not. It happens all the time. And so I'm not talking about any one particular type of person here, but let's just say let's just use nice, clean numbers, $100,000 of credit card debt. And then a friend, a family member says, hey, call Jeff Kelly and maybe you can get rid of it. Maybe you can file Chapter 13 or Chapter 7 and make this go away. And so people call and we say, yeah, let's talk. Let's get to the bottom of it, find out everything. And then we see the equity in the house. And it is not uncommon to see people come in with $100,000 credit card debt and have a house with $200,000 of equity. What happens in that situation? Well, we would have to be able to come up with a Chapter 13 plan to pay that debt back. And $100,000, that's a lot of money. That's a really high payment. I mean, you're probably talking close to $2,000 a month in a Chapter 13. After all is said and done and we factor everything in, what do you do in a situation where somebody can't afford it? Well, of course, normally when somebody can't afford to pay debt, they file Chapter 7. But if you have a house and you file Chapter 7 with excess equity, a trustee is going to sell that house. And one important thing that I try to always stress to anybody who files a Chapter 7 and owns a home, once you're in, you are in. You cannot quit. You cannot get out. You can't say, oops, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were going to sell my house. Psych. I'm going to cancel my case. No. That's not how Chapter 7 works. Once a Chapter 7 trustee puts his clause in, he has a duty to recover assets for the creditors, and he's going to sell your house if there's excess equity. So let's define this term. In the state of Georgia, it's $43,000 for a couple, $21,500 for an individual. That's not a lot in this market right now. Almost everybody coming in to meet with me that owns a house seems to have exposed equity. If we can come up with a Chapter 13 plan to pay the debt back, then we'll be okay as long as all of the debt gets paid. Which begs the question, a lot of people ask, why in the world would I, want to file Chapter 13? Why wouldn't I just, if I can afford to pay the debt, why wouldn't I do it outside of Chapter 13? And the answer can be summed up in one word: interest. So in a Chapter 13, as a general rule, we don't have to pay interest on unsecured creditors. So let's say you have $100,000 of credit card debt. Well, if you look at late fees and the most common interest rates, you're talking 33%. That's $33,000 a year in interest that you could save. So Chapter 13 is a great tool for getting rid of debt.
Like what you hear so far. Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. If you're intrigued by the world of bankruptcy and want a comprehensive guide to help you get out of debt, head on over to kellycanhelp.com/welcome and subscribe to our email list to have a guide to bankruptcy in Georgia, helping people get out of debt delivered right to your inbox. Now back to the show.
But if you're in a situation where you can't make a payment, Chapter 13 has rules. Bankruptcy has rules. If there's assets that can get taken to pay creditors that aren't protected by the exemption amounts, it's going to happen. And so I hate it. I wish Georgia would raise the exemption amount. There was talk in the last state legislature of raising the amount up to $100,000, which I think is fair. And I really wish that if I had my wish list granted, it would be when they come up with an amount, it should be adjusted every 5 years at least with inflation. As inflation goes up, the exemption should go up with it. But instead, it doesn't. So inflation has gone through the roof in the last couple of years. And so the real value of the exemption is going down every single year. But if you look at other states around us, almost most places have a much higher exemption than Georgia does. In fact, Texas and Florida, they have an unlimited housing exemption. So sometimes people will call and they'll say, well, I know they can't take your house from you. Well, they can't in Texas and they can't in Florida, but they can in the state of Georgia. So could you just pack it up and go buy a house in Florida and protect all your equity that way? Well, you got to live there for 4 years before you're going to be able to claim the exemptions of where you moved to. So O.J. Simpson did it, and I'm sure there probably are some people who are doing it right now where selling everything they own, move to Florida, move to Texas, and try to hold the creditors at bay long enough to get the exemption. But for people who are stuck in the state of Georgia because of jobs and family and such, if you're in a situation where the debt, Georgia's brutal. They can garnish 25% of your check. They can clean out your checking account. So option one is you can say, creditors, come and get me, and try to live with being garnished, which I don't advise, because if they get to your checking account, which they will, they're going to clean it out completely up to the amount of debt owed. And that's just a really hard way to live. It's a bad strategy. You'll see a lot of commercials about debt consolidation companies. My personal opinion is the vast majority of them, overwhelming majority, are crooks, and they'll just take your money for about 6 months and tell the creditors they can't speak to you, and then eventually you're going to get sued and you're going to get garnished and clean out your checking account. Anyway, I don't think that's a good option. If you can think outside the box and rent a room or do something to come up with income to make a Chapter 13 work, that's a viable a way. And I know it's hard and not easy, but if there's no way to make a 13 work and we can't live with the garnishment, the only other alternative is sell a house. And nobody wants to hear me say that. But if you've got $200,000 of equity in your house and you don't attack that credit card debt, eventually it will grow to the point where it's going to eat your equity. How does that happen? Well, they sue you, and then they get a FIFA, and they take the FIFA and they record that at your local county courthouse, and it attaches to your house. And now it's growing with interest on your house. So it's much better to sell, cash in your equity, get rid of the credit card debt, and move and get settled into a new place. And I know that's like terrifying for most people. I get it. I do think Georgia should raise the exemption amount in the next legislative session. People do need to be able to restructure. People do need to be able to survive. And right now it is really hard in this environment. And I'd like to see it raised to at least $100,000 for a married couple. And even with that, we would still be below a lot of other populous states in our country. So if you have any questions, if you want, an evaluation of your situation, we're happy to sit down with you and do it and see if we can make it work. You can give us a call at 770-881-8449. I also have a podcast, kellybankruptcy.com, and I've got videos on my YouTube channel in addition to the podcast. I wrote a book on chapter 13 and chapter 7. If you go to kellycanhelp.com/welcome, you can type in your email and download it there. Or if you just want to go on the website and schedule an appointment, you can self-schedule. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Bankruptcy Podcast. Make sure to visit our website, kellybankruptcy.com, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. If you liked this show, you might want to check out our guide to bankruptcy in Georgia, helping people get out of debt. Available at kellycanhelp.com/welcome. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.